From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
If the president wants to come up to me and tell me to my face that it was a terrible tragedy and how it should never have happened, and maintain telling us how nothing is going to be done about it, I'm going to happily ask him how much money he received from the National Rifle Association.
Never again. Students who survived the Parkland, Florida school shooting massacre on Wednesday are now organizing a March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C. to protest gun violence. We'll hear a moving address by high school senior Emma Gonzalez, who survived the shooting. Then to Puerto Rico.
We're facing a privatization on the energy front. We're also facing privatization of the educational point. The local government of Puerto Rico has introduced the concept of charter schools and has said that it's going to privatize schools. It almost seems like the perfect storm for disaster economics or what they call disaster capitalism.
5 months after Hurricane Maria battered Puerto Rico, a quarter of the island remains without power. But moves are being made to privatize the island's electrical grid and schools. We'll speak to the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump launched into a remarkable, angry and error-ridden tweet storm over the weekend following the Justice Department's decision to indict 13 Russians for interfering with the 2016 presidential election. In a string of 10 tweets, Trump lashed out at Democrats, the Mueller investigation, the Obama administration, his own national security advisor, and the FBI, which he falsely accused of spending so many resources on the Russia investigation it missed warning signs about school shooter Nicholas Cruz, who killed 17 people at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida last week. In one of the messages sent from his private Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach, Florida, Trump tweeted, "If it was the goal of Russia to create discord, disruption, and chaos within the U.S., then with all of the committee hearings, investigations, and party hatred, they've succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They're laughing their asses off in Moscow. Get smart, America," the president tweeted. Another tweet. "Very sad. The FBI missed all the many signals sent out by the Florida school shooter. This is not acceptable. They're spending too much time trying to prove Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. There is no collusion," he tweeted. Trump also attacked National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster for his comments to world leaders at the Munich Security Conference in Germany on Saturday.
And as you can see with the FBI indictment, the evidence is now really incontrovertible.
In response, President Trump tweeted, "General McMaster forgot to say the results of the 2016 election were not impacted or changed by the Russians, and that the only collusion was between Russia and Crooked H, the DNC, and the Dems," unquote. Crooked H is a reference to his Democratic rival Hillary Clinton. The Washington Post reports many European leaders at the Munich Security Conference were confused and alarmed by President Trump's tweet storm and Trump's attack on his national security advisor, H.R. McMaster. The Post reports that one anonymous European diplomat suggested H.R. McMaster and other U.S. officials may be following in the footsteps of German government officials who continued to serve during Hitler's rise, ostensibly in the name of protecting the country. President Trump's tweet storm came after the Justice Department indicted 13 Russians and 3 companies for interfering in the 2016 presidential election. Friday's sprawling indictment charges the Russians orchestrated a propaganda effort that began in 2014 to undermine the U.S. election system, then developed into an effort to help Donald Trump win. The indictment says the effort, coordinated by Russia's Internet Research Agency, or IRA, included Russians posing as political activists, stealing the identities of U.S. citizens, further politicize issues of immigration, race, and religion in efforts to push American voters to choose Trump over his rival, Hillary Clinton. This indictment also alleges some Russians were in contact with people associated with Trump's campaign, although it does not allege Trump's campaign was aware of the propaganda effort or that there was any collusion. This is Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein announcing the indictments Friday.
The indictment charges 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian companies for committing federal crimes while seeking to interfere in the United States political system, including the 2016 presidential election. The defendants allegedly conducted what they called information warfare against the United States, with the stated goal of spreading distrust towards the candidates and the political system in general.
Meanwhile, in news on Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian election interference, Trump's former deputy campaign manager, Rick Gates, will plead guilty to wire fraud and will testify against Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort. In Florida, as funerals continue for the 17 people killed at the Stoneman Douglas High School in Broward County, Florida, Wednesday, survivors of the school shooting have launched an unprecedented youth-led movement to demand gun control. On Friday, students at the South Broward High School in Florida walked out of class to protest the massacre, which was carried out by a 19-year-old white former student named Nicholas Cruz, who had a history of violent and abusive behavior, particularly against women. On Friday, the FBI had admitted it had failed to investigate Cruz, even after someone close to him called the agency's tip line in January to warn them, quote, about Cruz's gun ownership, desire to kill people, erratic behavior, and disturbing social media posts, as well as the potential of him conducting a school shooting, unquote. At a rally on Saturday, survivors of the school shooting demanded politicians stop accepting money from the National Rifle Association. Nicholas Cruz reportedly trained in a youth shooting club that was funded by the NRA. This is Emma Gonzalez, senior at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, speaking at Saturday's rally.
If the president wants to come up to me and tell me to my face that it was a terrible tragedy and how it should never have happened, and maintain telling us how nothing is going to be done about it, I'm going to happily ask him how much money he received from the National Rifle Association. It doesn't matter because I already know. $30 million! And divided by the number of gunshot victims in the United States in the 1.5 months in 2018 alone, that comes out to being $5,800. Is that how much these people are worth to you, Trump? To every politician who is taking donations from the NRA, shame on you.
We'll hear the full Emma Gonzalez speech after headlines. An Iranian plane crashed in the Zagros Mountains Sunday, and all 66 people aboard are feared dead. The crash is the latest in a series of aviation accidents in Iran in recent years, which are attributed to the difficulty of maintaining and repairing old aircraft in the face of international sanctions. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif exchanged sharp words on Sunday at an international security conference in Munich, Germany, a week after the two countries engaged in a direct military confrontation in Syria. Netanyahu held up a piece of metal that he claimed came from an Iranian drone, which Israel shot down after it allegedly penetrated Israeli airspace.
Mr. Zarif, do you recognize this? You should. It's yours. You can take back with you a message to the tyrants of Tehran. Do not test Israel's resolve.
In response, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif called Netanyahu's display cartoonish and accused Israel of escalating the threat of direct military confrontation.
Israel uses aggression as a policy against its neighbors. Mass reprisals against its neighbors, daily incursions into Syria, Lebanon, and other Arab countries, daily bombardments, almost routine bombardments of Syria. And once the Syrians have the guts to down one of its planes, it's as if a disaster has happened.
In Syria, the U.S.-backed Syrian Kurdish forces and the Syrian government have reached a deal for pro-government forces to enter Afrin to combat a month-long Turkish military offensive against the northwest Syrian city. Meanwhile, across the border, the Turkish government has arrested nearly 800 people for criticizing its military offensive in Afrin. And on Friday, a Turkish court sentenced 6 journalists to life in prison on charges of participating in the 2016 failed military coup. All 6 journalists deny any participation in the attempted coup. In Gaza, family members gathered for the funerals of 2 Palestinian teenagers who were killed after Israeli tanks opened fire during an air and ground assault this weekend. The Israelis say the airstrikes and tank fire were in retaliation for a bomb blast on the Israel-Gaza border, which injured 4 Israeli soldiers. The Ethiopian government has imposed a 6-month state of emergency, 1 day after the Ethiopian Prime Minister's abrupt resignation Thursday amidst widespread anti-government protests. It was the first time in modern Ethiopian history that a sitting prime minister quit. Despite the ban on all protests and strikes, there are reports the regional capital city of Gondar in northern Ethiopia is on strike today in protest of the state of emergency. In Mexico, a military helicopter crashed in the southern state of Oaxaca Friday, killing 14 residents who'd been displaced by an earthquake. The helicopter was carrying government officials surveying the earthquake damage at the time of the crash. Among the dead, 3 children. And back in the United States, the film Black Panther smashed box office records on its opening weekend, grossing more money than any other February debut. It was also the highest-grossing film ever by a black director, 31-year-old Ryan Coogler. It was also the 5th highest-earning opening weekend of any film in U.S. history. The superhero flick, based on the Marvel comic, features a majority black cast and has been called a defining moment for Black America. It's also renewed calls for the release of more than a dozen imprisoned members of the real Black Panther Party. Thousands of people have signed on to a petition calling on Disney to invest 25% of the film's worldwide profits in education programs in black communities. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Never again. That's become the rallying cry for students in Florida who survived last week's school shooting at the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland that left 17 people dead. Funerals continue to be held for the students and teachers who were killed in one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. The confessed gunman, Nicholas Cruz, was a former student who'd been expelled. He carried out the killings with an AR-15, which he reportedly bought 3 days after getting kicked out of the school last year. On Friday, the FBI admitted someone close to Cruz had called the agency's tip line in January to warn them about the teenager. According to the FBI, quote, the caller provided information about Cruz's gun ownership, desire to kill people, erratic behavior, and disturbing social media posts, as well as the potential of him conducting a school shooting. But the information was never passed on to the Miami field office, and no investigation took place. In response, Florida Governor Rick Scott called for the resignation of FBI Director Christopher Wray. Meanwhile, students who survived the shooting have begun organizing a March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C. and other cities, March 24th. One of the organizers is Emma Gonzalez, a senior at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, who survived the shooting. She gave a moving address at the gun control rally in Fort Lauderdale on Saturday.
They haven't already had a moment of silence in the House of Representatives, so I would like to have another one. Thank you. Every single person up here today, all these people should be at home grieving. But instead, we are up here, standing together, because if all our government and president can do is send thoughts and prayers, then it's time for victims to be the change that we need to see. And since they added the Second Amendment to the Constitution, our guns have developed at a rate that leaves me dizzy. The guns have changed and the laws have not. We certainly do not understand why it should be harder to make plans with friends on weekends than it is to buy an automatic or semi-automatic weapon. In Florida, to buy a gun, you do not need a permit, you do not need a gun license, and once you buy it, you do not need to register it. You do not need a permit to carry a concealed rifle or shotgun. You can buy as many guns as you want at one time. I read something very powerful to me today. It was from the point of view of a teacher. And I quote, "When adults tell me I have the right to own a gun, all I can hear is, my right to own a gun outweighs your student's right to live. All I can hear is mine, 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 mine." Instead of worrying about our AP Gov Chapter 16 test, we have to be studying our notes to make sure that our arguments based on politics and political history are watertight. The students of this school have been having debates on guns for what feels like our entire lives. AP Gov had about 3 debates this year. Some discussions on the subject even occurred during the shooting while students were hiding in the closets. The people involved right now, those who were there, those posting, those tweeting, those doing interviews and talking to people, are being listened to for what feels like the very first time about this topic that has come up over 1,000 times in the past 4 years alone. I found out today that there's a website called shootingtracker.com. Nothing in the title suggests that it is exclusively tracking the USA's shootings, and yet, does it need to address that? Because Australia had one mass shooting in 1999 and Port Arthur massacre introduced gun safety, and they haven't had one since. Japan has never had a mass shooting. Canada has had 3, and the UK had 1, and they both introduced gun control, and yet here we are with websites dedicated to recording these tragedies so that they can be formulated into statistics at your convenience. I watched an interview this morning and noticed that one of the questions was, do you think your children will have to go through other school shooter drills? And our response is that our neighbors will not have to go through other school shooter drills when we have had our say with the government, and maybe the adults have gotten used to saying it is what it is, but if us students have learned anything, it's that if you don't study, you will fail. And in this case, if you actively do nothing, people continually end up dead. So it's time to start doing something. In textbooks, not because we are going to be another statistic about mass shootings in America, but because, just as David said, we are going to be the last mass shooting. Just like Tinker v. Des Moines, we are going to change the law. That's going to be Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in that textbook, and it's all going to be due to the tireless effort of the school board, the faculty members, the family members, and most importantly, the students. The students who are dead, the students still in the hospital, the students who are now suffering from PTSD, the students who had panic attacks during the vigil because the helicopters who wouldn't leave us alone, hovering over the school 24 hours a day. There has been one tweet that I would like to call attention to. So many signs that the Florida shooter was mentally disturbed, even expelled for bad and erratic behavior. Neighbors and classmates knew he was a big problem, must always report such instances to authorities again and again. We did, time and time again. Since he was in middle school, it was no surprise to anyone who knew him to hear that he was the shooter. Those talking about how we should have not ostracized him, you didn't know this kid. Okay, we did. We know that they're claiming that there are mental health issues, and I am not a psychologist, but we need to pay attention to the fact that this isn't just a mental health issue. He wouldn't have harmed that many students with a knife. And how about we stop blaming the victims for something that was the shooter's fault? The fault of the people who let him buy the guns in the first place, those at the gun shows, the people who encouraged him to buy accessories accessories for his guns to make them fully automatic. The people who didn't take them away from him when they knew that he expressed homicidal tendencies. And I am not talking about the FBI. I am talking about the people that he lived with. I'm talking about the neighbors who saw him outside holding guns. If the president wants to come up to me and tell me to my face that it was a terrible tragedy and how it should never have happened, and maintain telling us how nothing is going to be done about it, I'm going to happily ask him how much money he received from the National Rifle Association. In the 1.5 months in 2018 alone, that comes out to being $5,800. Is that how much these people are worth to you, Trump? If you don't do anything to prevent this from continuing to occur, that number of gunshot victims will go up, and the number that they are worth will go down. And we will be worthless to you. To every politician who is taking donations from the NRA, shame on you. Would your first thought be, how is this going to reflect on my campaign? Which should I choose? Or would you choose us? And if you answered us, will you act like it for once? You know what would be a good way to act like it? I have an example of how not to act like it. In February of 2017, 1 year ago, President Trump repealed an Obama-era regulation that would have made it easier to block the sale of firearms to people with certain mental illnesses. The shooter before the shooting and the information that I currently know about him, I don't really know if he was mentally ill, but I wrote this before I heard what Delaney said. Delaney said that he was diagnosed. I don't need a psychologist, and I don't need to be a psychologist to know that repealing that regulation was a really dumb idea. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa was the sole sponsor on this bill that stops the FBI from performing background checks on people adjudicated to be mentally ill, and now he's stating for the record, well, it's a shame that the FBI isn't doing background checks on these mentally ill people. Well, duh! You took that opportunity away last year! People in the government who were voted into power are lying to us. And us kids seem to be the only ones who notice and are prepared to call BS. Companies trying to make caricatures of the teenagers nowadays, saying that all we are is self-involved and trend-obsessed, and they hush us into submissions when our message doesn't reach the ears of the nation. We are prepared to call BS. Politicians who sit in their gilded House and Senate seats funded by the NRA telling us nothing could have ever been done to prevent this. We call BS. They say that tougher gun laws do not decrease gun violence. We call BS. They say a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun. We call BS. They say guns are just tools like knives and are as dangerous as cars. We call BS. No, they say that no laws could have been able to prevent the hundreds of senseless tragedies that have occurred. We call BS. That us kids don't know what we're talking about, that we're too young to understand how the government works. We call BS. If you agree, register to vote. Contact your local congresspeople and give them a piece of your mind.
High school student Emma Gonzalez, a senior at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. She survived last week's school shooting that killed 17 people. She and classmates are now organizing a March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C. and other cities March 24th. 100 students from the school are planning to head to Florida's state capitol in Tallahassee Tuesday to meet with Florida legislators to demand a ban on military-style assault weapons like the AR-15 used by the gunman on Wednesday. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. To see all of our coverage of the killings in Parkland, you can go to democracynow.org. When we come back, our interview with the mayor of San Juan on this 5th-month anniversary of Hurricane Maria. Stay with us. Posthumous Nocturne in C-sharp minor, number 20, by Frédéric Chopin. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. This week marks 5 months since Hurricane Maria battered the island of Puerto Rico. The island is still facing a massive recovery effort. While the official death toll is just 64, it's believed more than 1,000 people died since the storm struck September 20th. More than a quarter of the island remains without power, marking the longest blackout in U.S. history. Wide swaths of the island were recently plunged back into darkness after an explosion and fire at an electrical station, sparking fears about the vulnerability of the Puerto Rican electrical system. Meanwhile, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, known as FEMA, is facing criticism after it was revealed only a fraction of the 30 million meals slated to be sent to the island after Hurricane Maria were actually delivered. FEMA approved a $156 million contract for a one-woman company to deliver 30 million meals. But in the end, FEMA canceled the contract after she just delivered 50,000 meals in what FEMA called a logistical nightmare. Well, on Friday, Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez and I spoke to the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz. I started by asking her what the situation on the island is 5 months after Hurricane Maria hit.
We are facing putting together a massive recovery effort, and that is part of the problem. It doesn't seem, wheels are spinning, but things don't seem to get off the ground. The botched effort continues to be deciphered. 55% more increase in the suicide rate, which tells you the mental state where people are at because of the dire situations and living conditions that we're still in. As you mentioned, 25% of the island is still without power. And just last night, Judge Taylor Swain denied the administration's request for an emergency loan for our power authority. So the government is now saying that employees are going to be let go, laid off, and that we're going to go to program blackout. So for many people, it will mean going back to September 20th, at least for a few days during the week. Our power grid is still very unstable, even those of us that have electricity. Just in San Juan, this past Sunday, a massive community of San Juan just got electricity for the first time, but things come and go. So we're facing a privatization on the energy front. we're also facing privatization of the educational point. The local government of Puerto Rico has introduced the concept of charter schools and has said that it's going to privatize schools. It almost seems like the perfect storm for disaster economics or what they call disaster capitalism. Everything seems to be out there for sale, while those essential services that do more than provide services, they're sort of the equalizers of our society, are all put on sale. Still, the money from FEMA is not coming. The municipalities are facing a dire need of cash in order to continue to provide services and make payroll. For San Juan, the situation is a little better, but we are still in a very delicate financial situation.
Mayor, I'd like to ask you about the role of the oversight board imposed by Congress. I saw on their site that they issued a bunch of letters to the governor on February 5th, basically saying that the governor's plan for what was going to happen with the water authority was not sufficient, that they wanted a 17% cut in costs because the water authority is projecting a 17% loss in water revenues as a result of the storm. They told the government that its overall financial plan was not sufficient in terms of cuts. Amazingly, I saw that they wanted the government to plan to create a budget reserve, extra cash in the budget while cutting other services. I'm wondering how you see the role of the oversight board, which is supposed to be helping Puerto Rico's economy right itself.
Well, you know, I have been against the oversight board from the beginning just because it's anti-democratic. 7 people that were not selected by our democracy, and we're in democracy now, are now making the final decisions. I may have very different views than the governor of Puerto Rico about how he has handled this crisis, about how he had supported the Trump administration in their budget effort and said they were doing a great job. But he is the governor of Puerto Rico. He was elected in a democratic manner. So one of the things that is important about the legislation put forward by Senator Warren and Senator Bernie Sanders with Nidia Velázquez and Luis Gutierrez is that it puts in the hands of Puerto Ricans the recovery of Puerto Rico. And if one thing was proven is that you cannot put the standard operating procedures of FEMA and other organizations and just put them on the ground here in this small island nation in the Caribbean and say that things are going to work as they have worked in other places before. So the Fiscal Control Board is here for one thing, and that thing is to get the bondholders to get paid. Now, initially, the governor, when he was campaigning, said that the Puerto Rican government had to pay, and now in this new fiscal plan, which is really an austerity plan, the governor submits it to the Fiscal Control Board, and the Fiscal Control Board says, no, we want more. We want more taxation. We want more privatization because we want less education because the Fiscal Control Board is taking about $500 million away from our largest public educational system, the University of Puerto Rico, and is taking away monies from the municipalities. So the Fiscal Control Board is here for one thing, and it is to ensure that bondholders get every single penny that they can. Now, should you pay for the loans that you made? You should pay for some part, but that should not come on the shoulders and stumping on the hopes and the livelihood of the Puerto Rican people. This is why Senator Gillibrand has also put together a legislation, and basically it's a Marshall Plan for Puerto Rico, which is something that I have been very keen on advocating for. You know, the United States did it in World War II for Europe, so let us just wipe out the entire debt and begin again, but let us make sure that Puerto Rico still have access to capital markets.
We started this conversation by saying it's been 5 months since Hurricane Maria hit. That's the longest U.S. blackout in history. With what? Do you agree with these figures? Are a quarter of the island still without electricity, not even to mention the latest blackout? What are the facts and figures on the ground, including what you understand, the number of people killed? Officially 60-something. Our numbers are something like 1,000.
Yeah, let me start towards that. In October, I was in a visit in the United States, and I used the numbers that the central government of Puerto Rico was given. The central government of Puerto Rico was saying in September, we had 991 cremations or deaths. That's about 500 more than we have ever had. And it sort of continued that way in October. So it is more than 1,000 people that have died, because you have to count not only the people that died directly while the storm was taking place, but the people that have died because they don't have oxygens in their homes, or because there were no oxygen tanks at the hospitals, or the people that have died because of the botched effort, because their own diseases were, let's say, made even worse. They didn't have their diabetic medication, their insulin, and so forth. So if you look at the suicide rate, which has gone up 55%, you know that more than 1,000 people have died. So I think that one of the important things that should come out of this devastating humanitarian crisis is that we should look at the way that we define a crisis and a situation of dire need. That's number one. Number two, yes, it is about 25%. The problem is that you may have an urban area where 5 houses in one street are lit up and the other 5 houses are not lit up. And that creates what the government is calling, and PREPA is calling, bolsillos, the pockets. And those pockets really are very unequal. And it seems to be that the majority of the people that now don't have electricity, which also impacts in them not having water, because a lot of the pumps, Yabucoa, which is the town where Maria came through, the mayor was telling me that he has 16 generators that he is paying for that are put in various water pumps in order to ensure that the people of Yabucoa have power enough to move the water. So it creates an escalated situation. The issue is the Fiscal Control Board put together another petition this morning, very early in the morning, for a much lower amount of loan. But if you don't have electricity, if you don't have an appropriate grid, you will not be able to jumpstart the economic motor of Puerto Rico. So one of the things that we continually ask for, and I continually advocate for, is a waiver on the Stafford Act. Why? The Stafford Act that controls FEMA, or gives life to FEMA, tells us that we need to build everything the exact same way as it was before. Well, yes, we need to pull back the electrical grid, but we also need to set the platform to transform and move from our addiction to fossil fuel to other sources of renewable energy. I am calling, and I will use your platform to do this, I am calling on any company in the United States that wants to provide and wants to build solar panels in Puerto Rico. Why? Because now you have a tax in the United States that when you import, thanks to Donald Trump, that when you import solar panels from outside of the United States, you pay a 30% tax. So come to San Juan. We will make sure that it's worth your while, because we have the legal tools in order to say we will put a waiver on the property tax that you have to pay, and we will put a waiver on the municipal taxes that you have to pay.
Mayor, to follow up on that issue of the electrical generation, my sister who lives in Calle is one of the many Puerto Ricans who only recently got power back on. Last weekend in Calle, they finally got electricity. But in the weeks before that, she says that there were private companies, in the days before that, private companies going door to door trying to convince the residents of her neighborhood to basically sign on to a private electrical generation system. So apparently the governor and the Promesa board both agree on the issue of privatizing electricity. But can you talk about what the private electrical companies have already started doing in terms of creating not solar, but their own privatized versions of PREPA?
Yes, and this is, we also have to own up and take a look at what we have done that was not appropriately. The central government of Puerto Rico waited 60 days in order to invoke APA and have all these private companies from the United States come and work here. We in San Juan have been working closely with the New York Power Authority, and they have been doing, you know, it's almost breathtaking when people see them in the street and they say, because you know that behind them comes electricity, and behind electricity comes an ability to at least have some semblance of a normal life and providing a good life for your family and for your community. This has not been the case in other towns. I always remind people that don't look at what is happening in San Juan and think that that is the exact same thing that is happening across Puerto Rico. As you move further from the metropolitan area, things are still. I just got off the phone with a woman in Morovis, a teacher in Morovis, where on a couple of occasions during the past few weeks, from San Juan, we have sent them powdered milk and water because the children don't have powdered milk and water in their schools. So it is important that people know that things are different. There have been mayors, the mayor of Comerío, that have talked about, look, let me help. What can I do from the standpoint of the municipality to ensure that you can do your job? And what they have been told, and this is a quote from the mayor of Comerío, Josian Santiago, what they have been told is, look, you cannot open this road for us to go up the hill and do the work that we need to do because the Army Corps of Engineers has subcontracted that. And the Army Corps of Engineers is waiting for the company that they have subcontracted to bring their equipment to Puerto Rico to get the job done. To which the mayor has said, but I have the equipment, I can get it done right now. And they've said from PREPA, well, we're sorry, but we have to wait because we already subcontracted that. The private companies are starting to leave by mid-March. But yesterday, just yesterday, the Army Corps of Engineers said that they no longer could comply with their goal of having 90 to 95% of the island nation of Puerto Rico energized by February, that they were thinking that that could happen perhaps by March, but it would be better off if they said by April. So what they promised first by December, which the governor and the Army Corps of Engineers had a tit for tat regarding that. Then they promised for February, and now they're saying, you know, it's most likely in April. So this keeps pushing back any opportunity that we have. Now, what does this create? It creates desperation amongst people. So that people, when you ask them in the street, are you in favor of privatization of the electrical company? They say yes. Now, when you ask them, well, and the governor of Puerto Rico made a terrible statement yesterday. When asked in New York, why would anybody buy PREPA, the Puerto Rico Power Authority, he said, well, there's a lot of space for making profits because the Puerto Rican people are used to paying high prices for energy. So as telling those that were listening, look, you may lower the cost of production of energy, leave the price at a very high, and this gap will be yours. If that's not disaster economics, and if that is not setting the stage for the commercialization of services that are there to promote equality amongst people, I don't know what it is.
We'll continue with Carmen Yulín Cruz, the mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, talking about privatization, FEMA, President Trump, and more coming up.
Una mano que me guíe entre tinieblas, una mano que acaricie mis dolores, una mano que me dibuje mi camino, una mano y el destino. La tierra levanta banderas de guerra.
As Puerto Rico marks 5 months since Hurricane Maria battered the island, we continue with our interview with the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz. Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez and I spoke to her on Friday. I asked her if she's opposed to the privatization of PREPA, the Puerto Rican Power Authority, the largest power authority in the United States.
Yes, yes, and I've been opposed ever since I was a member of the House of Representatives 9 years ago now. And I'll tell you why. Electricity isn't only about getting the lights in your house turned on. Electricity is about providing people access to equal services. So a private company, which is moved by profits, as it should be, may decide that in this very remote urban area of Puerto Rico, it is not worthwhile for them to put money into the system. It is not worthwhile for them to replace the light poles. So all of a sudden, some Puerto Ricans will be looked at with a different lens than other Puerto Ricans. I'm against privatization of public schools for the exact same thing. There is a reason why essential services are handled by the government in an island nation that's 100 miles long by 35 miles wide.
Mayor, I wanted to ask you about another issue, the issue of the role of the Puerto Rican diaspora in the United States. There are about more than 5 million U.S. citizens of Puerto Rican descent living in the mainland United States. Their role since this crisis has started in being able to provide support and assistance to their fellow Puerto Ricans on the island.
Yes, and in fact, I think we are now the diaspora. There are 5 million Puerto Ricans in the United States. There's about 3 million Puerto Ricans in the island nation of Puerto Rico. But the diaspora has been the echo of our voices. So many times they have in the past been at the forefront of very big fights when we, did what we had to do in order to get the Navy out of bombing the island of Vieques, the municipal island of Vieques, when we joined together in all different forces to get the release of Oscar Lopez Rivera a year ago. So the diaspora has been essential in ensuring that our voices are heard and magnified.
Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz, as you speak to us from San Juan, you just recently returned from Washington, where you were the guest of New York Senator Gillibrand at the State of the Union address of Trump. You certainly had run-ins with President Trump after Hurricane Maria, when he finally went down to the island and tossed rolls of paper towels at hurricane survivors. He also attacked you and Puerto Ricans. He said such poor leadership ability by the mayor of San Juan and others in Puerto Rico who are not able to get their workers to help. You responded by talking about his utter statement of hypocrisy. Have you changed your views of President Trump? What is your assessment of how he responded to the crisis, the hurricane in Puerto Rico?
Well, this has never been about President Trump or myself. This was always about saving lives and ensuring that the people of Puerto Rico got what they needed and still continue to get what we need in order to move forward. Now, when you sit there in Congress with all that power right there. It is, the activity itself has a magical ring to it. But then when you start hearing the president talk about and using language that is divisive, using language that destructs the ability of the American people to join forces together, then sort of the magic starts fading away somehow. I was very honored that Senator Gillibrand took it upon herself to invite me. It gave us, again, another opportunity to use various platforms to ensure that the American people and the powers to be know that this is not mission accomplished. As it was said the Tuesday before, the day before the State of the Union, FEMA said, mission accomplished. We're stopping all the deliveries of water and food to Puerto Rico. Now, it allowed me and the senator and many others the opportunity to use different platforms to call FEMA out on that, and lo and behold, they decided not to do that. So what I really want the American people to continue to understand is that, look, I would want nothing more than to stand in Democracy Now! And say, thank God, things are happening and federal agencies are stepping up. But yesterday, the Department of Labor of the Puerto Rican government, and of course, you know, the secretary was appointed by the Governor Rosselló, was saying, no, we haven't been able to pay because we haven't gotten the money from FEMA. And most of the American people probably think that out of that $4.9 billion that was approved between November and December, that we've gotten some of that money, we've gotten zero. Just because you throw millions of dollars at something, it doesn't mean that you're fixing the problem. It doesn't mean that you're fixing what is wrong. And again, I think that what happened in Puerto Rico, and some people, you know, say, well, if Puerto Rico was a state, this wouldn't happen. Well, I have one word for you, Katrina. You know, when people don't put their heart and soul into what they are doing, things go wrong. When they don't see the magnitude of the suffering of the people and just look at it from 10,000 feet above or 1,000 feet above in a helicopter, things go wrong. So I think Puerto Rico should be studied from the standpoint of the federal agencies to ensure that what happened in Katrina and what happened in Puerto Rico does not happen again. I had a short conversation with the mayor of Houston, and we were both saying we don't understand why the money that comes to the municipalities from FEMA has to go first to the state, through the federal level, then to the state level, then it's provided to the municipalities. And, you know, here's the mayor of Houston and here's the mayor of San Juan thinking exactly the same. So it isn't a political issue. And I think that's what many people in the Trump administration fail to understand. It is a human issue. It is a humanitarian crisis that wasn't handled properly. And that mishandling of it has led to many other things. Now, did we have problems before that? Yes. Have the problems increased after Irma and Maria? Indeed they have. And people say, well, you know, we have a credibility issue. Yes, we do. The whitefish situation gave the central government of Puerto Rico a credibility issue. The situation about a program called Tu Hogar Renace, which again, it was giving a very small company that didn't meet all the requirements, a multi-million-dollar contract, which was just taken back a few days ago. All of that provides a credibility issue. But the governor of Puerto Rico went to Congress and asked for $94 million. So he thought we needed $94 million. And a few days ago, they were celebrating $16 billion. 94 billion and 16 billion. Will that be enough? If you ask for 94, now you can't be celebrating 16. Are they important? Of course they are. Are they needed? Of course they are. Will that be enough? Well, from the account of the central government, it will not nearly be enough. And I think this is also the time now to look at the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States and ensure that Puerto Rico stop being a colony of the United States once and for all.
Mayor Yulín Cruz, the FEMA issue, you mentioned the Whitefish contract, which was canceled. Then you had the $156 million contract for a one-woman company to deliver 30 million meals. She delivers 50,000. FEMA approves a $30 million contract for tarps. Not one is delivered. Should there be criminal prosecutions here? Mm-hmm. And how are you dealing with these issues now? Are you somehow recouping the money?
Number one, if there should be investigations, and if they result in the fact that people have not done what they're supposed to do, and they committed criminal acts, they should be prosecuted. Because we cannot allow disasters to be the breeding ground of what Naomi Klein, of course, has called disaster capitalism. So what we are seeing is that the acts of central government and some acts of FEMA have made this a breeding ground for inappropriate behavior, and in fact have made this a breeding ground for people to suffer. And what does that open the path for? Privatization. 50% of our schools, as of 2 weeks ago, were not energized. Let's say it's 60% now. The majority of our students with special ed are not back at school yet. The majority of the schools are still going on a part-time basis. So what does that mean? Well, of course, the governor finds breeding ground because people are dissatisfied to privatize the school system. But the school system is about so much more than just what you learn in books. And let me pause here for a second and say that the hearts of the people of San Juan go out to the people of Parkland School in Florida, and really this cannot continue to happen in the United States. Lives cannot continue to be lost because of gun violence, and that's an issue that has to be dealt with in a swift and appropriate manner, and in balancing all of the criteria that you can balance. But as mayor of San Juan, I want to extend our condolences and our wishes that this finally sets a fire on the hearts of people in Congress and on the Trump administration to ensure that something gets done to finish that. Going back to education in Puerto Rico, what has happened is that then the governor has introduced basically a privatization bill where he says, and part of the piece of legislation says, that only those companies or programs or groups that are approved by the central government are going to be able to bid. So what the central government is doing is using the desperation of people, which in some sense has been brought upon by the botched effort to ensure that public services that are there to ensure that everyone gets treated the same are privatized. And in the short run and in the long run, that is a recipe for disaster, for discrimination, and for inequality.
Carmen Yulín Cruz, the mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, speaking to us on this 5th anniversary of Hurricane Maria hitting the island. We'll continue to cover the crisis in Puerto Rico and the push to privatize PREPA, the largest publicly owned power utility in the United States. This is Democracy Now! Happy birthday to Brendan Allen and Neil Shibata. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Charina Nadura, Nat Nita, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, and Paul Huckabee, our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Hugh Grand, David Prude. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.